Skillshare is for designers, photographers, marketers, artists, and lifelong learners. Skillshare is for foodies, commuters, risk takers, the young, and the young at heart. It's for strategists, free spirits, purists, the bold, the curious, the characters, the makers, and the breakers. Skillshare is for everyone, an online learning community with thousands of classes to advance your career, improve the world, and pursue the work you love. What will you learn next? It all starts on Skillshare.
This presentation, we're going to pick up a few loose ends in terms of pronouns. And the first item that we're going to address would be who and whom. How do you tell the difference? And why does it matter? And how can you be sure that you're using the right one? So now, one of the reasons that we have to specifically address this is because whom has largely fallen out of common usage. We have it fossilized, as it were, in a few specialized usages, such as to whom it may concern, or for whom the bell tolls. But aside from that, we don't use it in everyday speech. And so we have to pay attention to it. We have to learn how to use it correctly. And that's what we're going to do in the first couple slides here. And then we're going to go on to some other miscellaneous items that have to do with pronouns. So before we can discuss how we use these pronouns and how we tell them apart, who and whom, perhaps we should clarify what they are. Who is the subjective pronoun, the subjective relative pronoun, and it's in the same category as I, he, she, we, they. Okay, so it takes this subjective case. Whom belongs to the objective case. It's in the same category as me, him, her, us, them. And one of the ways that you can remember this is remember that whom with an M belongs to the list of pronouns that also have M's in them. Me, him, them. You can think of it as belonging to the group of M pronouns. And I think that's a handy little mnemonic device that helps you remember as we go forward, and we'll see how they actually work. Okay, I'm going to introduce you to another usage of the drop test. This one you might call the drop and roll, because you got to roll the sentence into another form. But say we start off with the sentence, I can't believe who or whom, you don't know which yet, you invited to the party. So what do? You have a sentence like this and you want to use the correct form, who or whom, and you can't figure it out. Well, first you want to isolate the relative clause. So the relative clause is the clause that begins with who, okay, and who or whom you invited to the party. Okay, got that? So that's the relative clause. It's relative to the antecedent, you know. Okay. So you drop the who or whom and roll the sentence. And so put it into what you might call a normal sentence. You invited he or you invited him. Okay. So, and I think that you can see that you would say you invited him. And if you would use you invited him, then whom is the correct form, because remember, whom goes into the same category as the M pronouns. I can't believe whom you invited to the party. Okay, that might seem a little bit convoluted, but that's one of the ways that we can figure it out. And you can also see how that relative clause is working. There's another way, which is simply that if you have a relative clause, such as I can't believe who or whom you invited to the party, if you have the relative pronoun, you know, who or whom, immediately adjacent to another noun or pronoun, then you use whom, because that whom, that relative pronoun, is in the objective case, and you have to reorient the entire sentence. So If, for instance, you had a sentence, I can't believe who or whom invited you to the party, in that case, the relative pronoun would be standing by itself and immediately adjacent to the verb. So if the relative pronoun is immediately adjacent to the verb, and so you could actually restate the sentence, the drop and roll test, you could restate it as, she invited you to the party. I can't believe who invited you to the party. She invited you to the party. Then you'd use who. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Now, in the check your knowledge exercises, you have a few chances to test your knowledge on and your skill in this type of formation. Okay, so remember, drop and roll, isolate the relative clause, and then substitute another pronoun in the place of the who or the whom. And that should help you figure out which is the correct form. So let's try this drop and roll test for the who or whom, and we'll just see if we can get it to work. And for these two examples, we're going to assume that the animals that we're talking about are male. Okay, so we use the male personal pronoun just because that shows case inflection, whereas it does not. Anyway, but let's start with the sentence. The bear who or whom raided the campgrounds is notorious in these woods. So the first thing we do is isolate the relative clause, who or whom raided the campgrounds. So what would you say? He raided the campgrounds or him raided the campgrounds? I think that we would say he raided the campgrounds, wouldn't we? And so then who is correct? So the correct answer would be the bear who raided the campgrounds is notorious in these woods. Okay, so we'll go on to the next one. We'll have one more of these little exercises, and then we'll go on to a different subject. Okay, just one more. So here we have a dog, the case of the dog. Okay, the dog who or whom the mailman bit had to be taken to the vet. Okay, so again, we isolate the relative clause, who or whom the mailman bit. So would you say the mailman bit he or the mailman bit him? And notice that in this case, we have the relative pronoun and the noun next to each other. So now we have to shift the substitute for the relative pronoun to the end of the clause. And if you remember the rule that if you have the relative pronoun next to a noun or pronoun, that's probably a sign that we're going to be using the whom form. And as a matter of fact, I think you'll see that if you say the mailman bid he versus the mailman bid him, the mailman bid him, the second one, is the preferable form. And that leads us to the dog whom the mailman bit had to be taken to the vet. Okay? That dirty mailman. Okay, so now we're going to go on to a different aspect of this miscellaneous group of pronoun issues. Another thing to remember is that prepositions always put pronouns into the objective case. And remember what prepositions are, and very shortly, in one of the following lessons, we're going to be talking specifically about prepositions. But for now, remember, prepositions are those little words that show us relationships between things in a sentence, and we can remember what they are by remembering the preposition box, where we are in relationship to the preposition box. So I'm on the box, I'm in the box, I'm going through the box, I'm under the box, words like this. Okay, so, but these always take the objective case, which is extremely important in the use of pronouns. So we see some examples over here. She bought the flowers for me, not for I, but for me. I gave the present to them, not to they, but to them. She directed her comments at him. She or he baked the cake for her. The fairy waved the magic wand over him, not over he, but over him. And they arrived after us. So not after we, but after us. So the preposition always puts the pronoun into the objective case. This is an invariable rule. And I'm going to come back to this or continue this idea in the next slide. because there's a very special case where a lot of people these days make a very serious error, an egregious error. There's a $5 word for you. Egregious means very bad, 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 bad. In the use of a very particular preposition and a very common phrase. But I'll talk to that in the next slide. This is a very peculiar instance of widespread error between you and what? What would you say? Between you and I, the movie stunk, or between you and me, the movie stunk. Okay, so be very careful about this, because what a lot of people might say is absolutely wrong. And this is something that seems to be widespread in our culture. I don't know exactly why. It might be what's called hypercorrection. People remember some vague rule and then apply it incorrectly. But I have heard newscasters who make millions of dollars a year, professional newscasters, use the wrong form, which, if we're to draw any kind of lesson from, might just tell us that just because you've got a pretty face and you're on TV and millions of people listen to you doesn't mean you know what you're talking about. Anyway, but I'm going to go forward and I'm going to explain what the correct form of the between you and I or me is. Now, before I tell you which one is correct, between you and I or between you and me, I'm going to see if you can figure it out for yourself. So, which would you choose? And here I'm going to give you two choices, and I'm going to put that same type of construction into a slightly different form. And so maybe you can hear which one is correct. So, between I and my loved one is a raging sea, or between me and my loved one is a raging sea. Very few people would choose the first item. Between I and my loved one is a raging sea. That's incorrect. You see, so it's between me and my loved one is a raging sea. So the rule is what works in one form, or the correct format in one form in one construction, is also the correct format in another construction. So you see, so the me has to follow the between. And of course, it's the rule, right? Between is a preposition, so it takes the objective case, which would be me. But here you can see that between me and my loved one is a raging sea. So in the same way, we would say between me and you. That really wasn't a very good movie. Okay, so between you and me. So between you and me is the correct form. And I never want to hear you say between you and I, because that would be wrong. Absolutely wrong. Never say it. Never. Ever. Here's a special case that provides us some sort of quandary sometimes. What would you say? She loves that dog more than I, or she loves that dog more than me? Which do you think is correct? All right, so this is a test. All right, so I want you to speak clearly right now. Say to the screen which one you think is correct. The first one or the second one? She loves that dog more than I, or she loves that dog more than me? Go ahead. Okay, got it? That's your final answer? Okay, now let's go to the next slide, and we'll see which one is indeed correct. You're right! Both are correct. But it depends. It all depends on the ellipsis, which means the part left out. And both phrasings are correct and belong in formal English, but it depends on what you mean to say that rules which pronoun form you use. So, for instance, and here above you'll see the sentence is written out, and the verb that's left out in parentheses and highlighted in red, she loves that dog more than I do. You see, so if you're trying to say that she loves the dog more than I love the dog, then she loves the dog more than I. But if you want to say that she loves the dog more than she loves me, then you use the me form. She loves that dog more than me. You see, so in this case, the case of the pronoun is absolutely vital to your getting your point across. I mean, if you mean one, but you say the other, people are going to be totally mistaken. I mean, you just might be saying that, well, she's really more fond of the dog than I am. Okay, she loves the dog more than I do. But the relationship's solid, but if you say she loves the dog more than me, people are going to start to think, oh, your relationship's on the rocks and heading for a breakup, you see? So you're not communicating what you intend to communicate. Your improper use of the pronoun case can lead to some pretty disastrous results. Okay, so anyway, so it all depends on the ellipsis. So when you have an instance like this, sometimes it helps to insert the missing verbs. So is it that she loves the dog more than I love the dog? Or does she love the dog more than she loves me? Okay, and just remember that as a model. And sometimes, and I'll just put this in as an aside, sometimes it's easier to remember the specific example and extrapolate the rule from that when you want to apply it, then try to remember the non-specific rule, the general rule, the abstract rule. At least it's easier for me because I tend not to think in the abstractions, but I think in the specifics. So remember this example, and that'll help you as you go forward and you have these types of constructions. So here's a little exercise following up on the previous slides. Find the hidden verb. So what would you say? He is taller than I, or he is taller than me. So be careful, because the form that you might expect is not the correct form. That is, if you expect the colloquial. Now, colloquial, which of course means, you should know by now, means how we speak in everyday language. That's the colloquial. The colloquial is, he is taller than me. And we'd say that, and even your professor might say that. But look at the verb that is being ellipsed, that is not stated, and the pronoun that would go with it. So would you say, he is taller than I am, or he is taller than me am? Okay. I hope you would not say the second one. I'd hope you would say, he is taller than I am. So the correct form of the original would be, he is taller than I. Okay. So again, insert the hidden verb, the ellipsed verb, and that'll guide you towards the proper form in this type of construction. Here's another form that's quite common. It's called an appositive. You have a pronoun and a noun against each other. Okay. So here is an example. We or us students object to higher tuition rates. Okay. What would be the correct form? We or us students. And again, another example, management awarded bonuses to us or to we employees. Okay, so there's a variation of the drop test that is a very easy way to figure out what the correct form is, and I'll get to that in the next slide. But just think about what would be the correct form in each one of these instances. So again, the drop test. And in this case, what we do is we drop the noun and leave the pronoun by itself. Because remember the rule that how it works by itself is how it works in combination, in any other kind of combination. So drop the noun. So would you say we object to higher tuition rates, or us object to higher tuition rates? Okay, I think that you can see that you would say we object to higher tuition rates. The other would be incorrect. It would be along the lines of me want cookie, right? Would you say management awarded bonuses to us, or management awarded bonuses to we? Okay, so again, I think that you would see that bonuses to us is the correct form. Okay, very simple, expedient solution to this question. Okay, when you have the appositive, that is a pronoun and a noun together, such as we students, or to us employees, you simply drop the noun, and then you can tell which would be the correct pronoun form by holding the pronoun in isolation. Pronouns with ing words, and sometimes these are called gerunds. Okay, the ing words, such as we objected to him voting, or we objected to his voting. I saw him walking in the park. I saw his walking in the park. Okay, which form would you use? And here there is not a firm rule that you always use one pronoun form rather than the other, but it varies according to the context of the sentence, and I'll explain that in the next slide. In both these instances, you have to look at the context of the sentence. So in the first instance, would you say we objected to him voting or his voting? You see, it's not him that you're objecting to. He's a nice guy. You like him. Okay? You objected to his voting. You objected to his voting. Where's the emphasis? Okay, what is it that you're objecting to? Not to him, but to his voting. Okay, so in that case, the possessive pronoun would be correct. On the other hand, I saw him or his walking in the park. You see, so it's not the walking that you saw. That would be kind of strange to say. I saw the walking, okay. I saw him walking in the park. Okay, so he was walking in the park, and that's when I saw him. So a little tricky, but you have to keep in mind what the context is. Are you focusing on the action or on the, say in this case, the person? Okay, so that's what you have to do in this type of construction. We objected to his voting, not him, but his voting. Or I saw him walking in the park. Okay, and another way to think about this, perhaps, is instead of we objected to his voting, you could say I objected to the voting by him. Okay, you see, so you can put it in that way, and you can see that it's the voting that's the most important aspect of this, and so you'd use the possessive, the his. But you couldn't say I saw the walking by him in the park. That wouldn't make any sense, would it? So I saw him walking in the park. Okay, so hope that's clear. And again, if it's not, feel free to post questions in the chat area, and we'll go on to the next slide. If you remember back to when we were talking about verbs, and verbs in particular using the or, you'll remember the rule, the nearest possible subject. Well, the same type of rule governs pronouns that involve the construction ruled by or. Okay, so the nearest possible antecedent rules the pronoun. So we have a couple of cases here that will serve as examples. Neither the candidate nor the supporters received their invitations on time. Okay, candidate nor the supporters. So you see, so what pronoun should we use? Well, because supporters is nearest to the possessive pronoun there, it takes the plural possessive pronoun. And I suppose you could say neither the supporters nor the candidate received his invitations on time. Now that would be a little awkward, and so you have to have an ear as to what would be least awkward, but technically that would be correct. It's the nearest possible antecedent that rules the pronoun. And in the same way, if you would say either Joan or Frederica might lend you her coat. So remember, it's the nearest possible antecedent. So Frederica, a woman's name, we assume that Frederica is a woman, so it's her coat, not their coat. They don't share a coat. They don't have one coat between them, and if they're going out in winter weather, they have to discuss or flip a coin as to who's going to wear the coat. No, each one has her own coat. Okay, that's singular, and either Joan or Frederica might lend you her coat. Okay, so in this type of construction, it's the pronoun is ruled by the nearest possible antecedent. A word about sexism in language usage, and very often this comes up when we're struggling with whether to use his or her, either individually or together, in referring to kind of a general case. Now, nowadays we want to use the actual phrase, his or her, and there's a reason behind that and a history behind that. And this came about, 1970s or so. People started looking at what was before then the general usage. And before then, we would have usages such as we see right here. Every doctor should care for his patients. An engineer must double check his instruments. Each nurse should ensure that her uniform is clean. So do you see what's happening here? Well, first, the higher paid, more prestigious, more powerful positions are accorded to males, and the nurse, who is generally thought of as being in a less prestigious position than a doctor, though many people will tell you it's the nurse who cures you, not the doctor. But so maybe it's the nurse who's more important. But anyway, she doesn't get paid as if she's more important, and so it's assumed that the nurse is a female. So we've sexually discriminated even in our general language, our assumptions as to whether males or females fill particular roles. Now, it was explained when I was growing up that the his or the he, every student should work as hard as he can, etc. It was explained that the he there, or in the cases of the examples that we have over here, that those pronouns, the male pronoun, does not really refer to males. It refers to the general case. It refers to all humanity, much as man or mankind refers to all humanity. But we don't even use that anymore. But then people started looking at language uses and started doing tests, like psychological tests, and actually determined that that's not the case, that even though we might understand this issue intellectually, still viscerally, or in our real assumptions, we actually assume that if we say every doctor should care for his patients, that only men are doctors. An engineer must double check his instruments. Actually leads us to think that only males are engineers, and each nurse should ensure that her uniform is clean, lead us to the assumption that only women are nurses. You see, so the language does affect how we think. And so nowadays we use a different form, and I'll get to that in the next slide. Very simply, what we do to avoid sexist implication, that is sexist stereotypical assumptions, is that we use his or her. Okay, and there's another way that we can do this as well, but first we'll start off with his or her. Every doctor should care for his or her patients. An engineer must double check his or her measurements. Each nurse should ensure that his or her uniform is clean. Okay, so in each one of these cases, note that we use the his or her, or if we're referring to the subject of a sentence, we say he or she. Every doctor should care for his or her patients. He or she, meaning the doctor, the general doctor, he or she is responsible for the life of, etc. Okay, so his or her, he or she, and so forth. Another way to do this, because sometimes the his or her, the he or she, him or her, his or her construction gets a little bit clunky. And so sometimes what we do is we put the pronouns into the plural. We put everything into the plural. Doctors should care for their patient. Doctors, plural, should care for their patients. Engineers must double check their measurements. All nurses should ensure that their uniforms are clean. You see, because the plural pronoun doesn't reflect gender. And so we're able to use that without fear of offending somebody or being sexist or making sexist implications. There's one other thing that we can do, which is to eliminate as many pronouns as possible. So an engineer must double check measurements. Okay, so I've eliminated the possessive pronoun altogether. So anyway, but whatever you use, make sure that you use it consistently, and do avoid making sexist implications or assumptions in your use of language. With all that said, sometimes gender reference is appropriate. If the group that you're referring to is not the general population, which is roughly half male, half female, but you're referring to a specialized group that is all one or the other, then it's appropriate to use the gender-specific pronouns, such as every boy on the boys' Little League team should pick up his uniform, okay? Because it's the boys' Little League team, there are only boys on the team, so his is appropriate. Every girl on the girls' volleyball team should pick up her uniform. Ditto. Every student at St. Anthony's Academy for Boys must come to the office to pick up his schedule. Okay, so again, and we could go on and invent all sorts of other examples, but if you have a population that's only one or the other, then it's appropriate to use one of the gender-specific pronouns. Okay, in fact, it'd be silly to say every boy on the boys' Little League team should pick up his or her uniform. That leaves the reader questioning what exactly is going on that boys' Little League team. Okay, perhaps nowadays many of these teams are diverse. They have both boys and girls, but then it wouldn't be called a boys' Little League team. Anyway, but it's up to you to judge. But remember, sometimes gender reference is appropriate. So that's it. We're done with the pronouns, or as I've just been dying to say, that's all, folks. Okay, so we're done with the pronouns. Do the exercises that are provided for you, and the check your knowledge exercises. Read the text, and of course go back over these wonderful videos. I'm sure you're going to show your friends. You can invite your friends over, serve popcorn and pizza and beer, and show them all the wonderful videos about grammar. Okay, but we've covered pronouns, and you had no idea, as I said before, that such little words could have so much going on in them and around them, but they do. Anyway, but we're done now, and now we're going to go on to another issue that we have to deal with in terms of English grammar, and I'll see you then.